Welcome to Psychodepth. I'm Mark Glatt. Here we explore the hidden psychology behind your thoughts, emotions, and relationships, so you can understand yourself on a deeper level. You don't repeatedly attract emotionally unavailable people just by coincidence or bad luck. From a psychological perspective, there is often a deeper, hidden pattern operating in the background of your emotional choices, one that most people are not consciously aware of. At the core of this idea is how the human brain forms emotional templates. From childhood onward, your mind starts learning what love, attention, and emotional connection look like. These early experiences, especially with caregivers, family dynamics, or first emotional bonds, create a kind of internal blueprint. This blueprint doesn't just disappear when you grow up. It quietly influences how you interpret attraction, safety, and emotional connection in adult relationships. So when you meet someone new, your brain is not only evaluating who they are in the present moment, it is also comparing them to what feels familiar at a deeper emotional level. And here's the key point. Familiar does not always mean healthy. If your early emotional environment involved inconsistency, emotional distance, or unpredictability, your brain may unconsciously recognize those same patterns later in life and interpret them as normal or even attractive. This is where emotionally unavailable partners often come into the picture. These individuals may be distant, inconsistent, or emotionally limited in their ability to connect deeply. Yet, for someone whose emotional system is wired toward familiarity over security, this kind of behavior can feel strangely compelling. Not because it is good for you, but because it matches an internal emotional script your brain already understands. Another important layer is the reward system in the brain. Emotionally unavailable people often create cycles of uncertainty, moments of attention followed by distance. This inconsistency can activate a stronger emotional and neurological response compared to stable, consistent affection. The brain can start chasing the high of brief emotional connection, even if the overall experience is stressful or unfulfilling. Over time, this creates a repeating cycle. You meet someone, feel intense attraction, notice emotional distance, and then try harder to gain closeness. When it doesn't work, the pattern often repeats with a similar type of person. It can start to feel like you are stuck in the same relationship story, just with different characters. The important realization here is that this is not random. It is a learned psychological pattern combining familiarity, attachment conditioning, and emotional reward mechanisms. The good news is that patterns are not permanent identities. Once you become aware of them, you can start interrupting the cycle by recognizing emotional familiarity versus emotional safety, and by consciously choosing relationships that feel stable rather than just emotionally intense. If this sounds like your experience, don't ignore it. This pattern is more common than you think. Subscribe to the channel for more deep psychological insights on relationships and human behavior, and learn how to break these cycles step by step. Sometimes the people you feel most strongly attracted to are not actually the ones who are best for you. They are the ones who feel familiar to your nervous system. From a psychological point of view, your brain is constantly trying to predict emotional safety based on past experiences. If, earlier in life, love felt inconsistent, distant, or emotionally unpredictable, your mind adapts to that pattern. It doesn't necessarily label it as bad, it simply stores it as normal. So later in life, when you meet someone who is emotionally unavailable or slightly distant, your brain may recognize that emotional pattern and feel an unconscious sense of familiarity. That familiarity can mistakenly feel like attraction, even when the relationship is not truly stable or healthy. This happens because the nervous system prioritizes what it knows over what is actually good for it. Familiar emotional patterns require less uncertainty for the brain to process, so they can feel strangely comfortable, even if they involve anxiety, chasing, or emotional confusion. On the other hand, emotionally available and stable people may feel different or even uncomfortable at first, simply because your system is not used to that kind of consistency. For some people, calm emotional energy can feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can sometimes be misinterpreted as less exciting. This is why many people find themselves repeatedly drawn to similar types of emotionally unavailable partners. It is not a conscious decision. It is an automatic response shaped by emotional conditioning over time. The key insight is this: attraction is not always a sign of compatibility. Sometimes it is a sign of recognition. And recognition is based on the past, not necessarily the present. Understanding this difference is the first step toward changing relationship patterns and learning to choose emotional safety over emotional familiarity. The type of emotionally unavailable or distant people you find yourself attracted to is often not random. It can be deeply connected to childhood emotional conditioning. From a psychological perspective, your brain develops its understanding of love, connection, and emotional safety very early in life. The way caregivers respond to your needs, emotions, and attention becomes the foundation for what your mind later defines as normal love. If during childhood emotional connection was inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, your nervous system adapts to that unpredictability. Over time, your brain stops seeing emotional distance as unusual and instead starts recognizing it as familiar. This becomes your internal template for relationships. As an adult, this template quietly influences your attraction patterns. When you meet someone emotionally unavailable, your brain may not immediately see a problem. Instead, it can feel a strange sense of recognition, because the emotional rhythm matches what you already experienced earlier in life. This is why emotionally available and stable partners can sometimes feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable at first. Your system is not used to consistent emotional safety, so calm and secure behavior may not trigger the same intensity as unpredictable relationships do. In contrast, emotionally distant people can create a cycle of uncertainty, moments of attention followed by withdrawal. This pattern can unconsciously activate deeper emotional responses because it resembles the emotional environment your brain adapted to in childhood. Over time, this conditioning can lead to repeated relationship patterns where you find yourself drawn to similar types of partners, even if the outcomes are emotionally painful or unfulfilling. The important insight is that these patterns are learned, not fixed. Once you become aware of how childhood experiences shaped your emotional expectations, you can begin to recognize the difference between what feels familiar and what is actually healthy for you. If every relationship in your life feels like you are chasing someone who never fully chooses you, psychology suggests this is not random. It is often a repeating attachment cycle rather than different individual experiences. In simple terms, your mind can fall into a familiar emotional loop where you are repeatedly drawn to a similar type of partner and a similar relationship dynamic. Even though the faces change, the emotional pattern stays the same. You feel strong attraction at the beginning, but over time, the other person becomes distant, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. And instead of stepping away, you may find yourself trying harder to gain their attention, approval, or emotional presence. From an attachment psychology perspective, this often happens when your internal system is more comfortable with uncertainty than with stability. When love feels slightly out of reach, your brain can interpret that as something worth pursuing. The emotional chase becomes familiar, even addictive in a way, because it creates hope, tension, and occasional moments of reward. The cycle usually follows a pattern: strong emotional interest, limited emotional availability from the other person, increased effort from you, temporary closeness, emotional withdrawal again. This loop can repeat across different relationships, making it feel like you are stuck in the same story. The important point is that this is not about bad luck in choosing people. It is about how your nervous system has learned to respond to emotional connection over time. What feels intense or meaningful may actually be a pattern of inconsistency that your brain has normalized. Breaking this cycle starts with awareness. Once you recognize that you are not just choosing people, but also repeating an emotional pattern, you can begin to pause and ask, is this connection truly stable? Or does it just feel familiar? That single shift in awareness is often the first step toward changing your relationship outcomes. Emotionally unavailable partners don't just appear in your life by coincidence. From a psychological perspective, your attachment system, the part of your mind that regulates how you connect, trust, and bond with others, can quietly influence who you feel drawn to. This system develops early in life based on your emotional experiences, especially how safe, supported, or understood you felt in close relationships. Over time, it creates patterns that guide your behavior in adult relationships. The important part is that this process is mostly unconscious. You may believe you're simply choosing someone, but your attachment system is often filtering who feels attractive, safe, or familiar. If your attachment pattern is shaped around inconsistency or emotional distance, you may find yourself naturally drawn to partners who reflect those same traits. Emotionally unavailable people can feel intriguing or even deeply attractive, not because they offer a healthy connection, but because they match an internal emotional expectation your brain already understands. This can create confusion. On one hand, you may want a stable, emotionally present relationship. On the other hand, your internal system may respond more strongly to people who are less available. As a result, you might repeatedly find yourself in relationships where you are investing more, waiting longer, and feeling less emotionally secure. The key insight is that attraction is not always a reliable guide to what is healthy. Sometimes it is simply a reflection of past emotional patterns still influencing your present choices. When you begin to recognize this, you can slowly shift from reacting automatically to choosing more consciously. If this pattern feels familiar, take it as a sign to explore your attachment style more deeply. Subscribe for more psychology-based insights on relationships and emotional patterns, and start building awareness that can help you create healthier, more stable connections. This content is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you are experiencing ongoing emotional distress or relationship difficulties, consider speaking with a qualified mental health professional for personalized guidance.